Jim Howard here in Fort Worth, Texas.
Thanks very much for watching.
Hello, Jim Howard here in Fort Worth, Texas. Today's date, it's August 5th of 2022. That's 7:30 p.m. Let's see, I've got my Chrome box hooked up. I hooked that up today. What else? I'm using Manicam, or is it Minicam? Manicam, I think. I can't. Anyway, I'm not a fan of Facebook at all, but a whole bunch of people that I worked with, security officers, they're on there. There's actually only a couple I'm really interested, in keeping in contact with. The others are, well, I worked with them and I got along okay with them, but they were nothing compared to what, they were right wing, or they were sort of arrogant, and I don't know, but there's a couple, well, more than a couple, that I do enjoy, sort of keeping in contact with. But also, one of the hospitals that I worked at for 9 years, well, I worked for the corporation for, at different hospitals for altogether for 18 years, but the one hospital that I worked at for 9 years, small hospital, and all of the staff there, we were like family. We knew each other. Give you an example. There was Virginia, older nurse, and she had raised, I think, 7 boys and 3 daughters, I believe. Maybe it was 2. And she put them all through college. She was divorced, and she had put them all through college. But she didn't like police. And I don't think she liked security, because when I first went out there, the hospital built a small emergency center, and for a year she was out there, and a very small, it wasn't a hospital, it was just a treatment emergency center. So finally then, when the hospital opened up, then I went out there and was there for 9 years. And she was, there the entire time. Anyway, she didn't like police, and I don't think she liked security. So for a little bit, there was a little problem between. Of course, I'm so easygoing, She had a problem, and she was like watching me. I think watching me, and well, also the hospital was so small that on weekends and on nights, when administration wasn't there, the RN, of course there was 2 RNs in the emergency room, but one of the RNs was at nights, and on weekends the acting administrator if something came up. And that's just the way hospitals work. That's the way the big hospitals work. Although I've heard of hospitals where maybe they're a lot bigger or something. I've never heard of any hospital in Kansas City but maybe I didn't work at all the hospitals in Kansas City, but I have heard of hospitals that on the weekends and on midnights or whatever, that there's actually somebody from administration, you know, who is, you know, an administrator. That's their, you know. But none of the hospitals I worked at, it was always, you know, an RN was in charge. Could be a problem, and I've run into that problem. Almost always, though, you know, the RN, you know, the nurse would, you know, when something came up, they handled it, you know, they handled it properly. Now there was one time when a tornado set down in Kansas City, Missouri, and you know, it was heading for, set down, it was heading for, my mind is going now, I can't remember the open, it was heading for a hospital. That hospital went into code gray, you know, the weather thing, as it was heading for that hospital. It didn't hit the hospital, lifted up or whatever. Heading for another hospital, that would have been, oh, my mind is going. Baptist. Yeah, heading for Baptist. They had gone into code gray. Right next to Baptist, almost, Research Medical Center, they went into code gray. And the storm is still coming. The tornado, you know, it's lifted up a little bit, but it's coming. And let's see. Anyway, it was heading for the hospital that I was working at then, Trinity Lutheran Hospital. I was on duty. And behind us, by the way, you know, was oh, it doesn't matter. Hospital. Anyway, I called the, by the way, keep in mind, when I was a teenager or whatever, I was doing a whole bunch of things. But I was also in the Ground Observer Corps, watching for Russian aircraft. Finally, the Air Force did away with that. Then, of course, I was in civil defense at the same time, and, you know, I received training from civil defense. When the Air Force did away with the Ground Observer Corps, the civil defense then trained us to be weather observers. And so we were weather observers for, you know, looking out for tornadoes and that type of stuff. And anyway, I had all this. So anyway, I'm working at Trinity, and there's a tornado heading for us. And so I called the house supervisor, and I said, there's a tornado, you know, heading, I gave her a little bit of information heading this way. And I didn't give her any, you know, I mean, I didn't tell her, hey, you know, I have been trained by the Weather Bureau as a weather observer. I am a amateur radio operator. We have a thing called Skywarn where we watch for, you know, well, you don't have time to go in and you know, with a tornado, it wouldn't matter. I wouldn't have done it anyway, you know, anyway, and I said, well, you know, we need to go into code gray. No, I don't think we want to go into code gray, because then we'd have to page, you know, all clear, and it might disturb the patients and wake them up later and whatever. And I said, you know, ma'am, the tornado is on the ground. It's heading, you know, it's heading this way. I really think we do need to go into code gray. No, I don't want to do it. And I, you know, I forget exactly what I said, you know, and I wrote it up on my activity sheet. I guess if the storm had have hit us, I wouldn't have had an activity sheet. It'd have been blowing around in the sky someplace. And that was it. That's just the way the thing, you know, that's just the way the thing worked. Of course, in the newspaper and on the television or whatever, you know, next day it, you know, it said, you know, tornado set down such and such a hospital. They didn't say code gray, you know. And even at some hospitals, the code used might have been, you know, something other than code gray, whatever it was. But the paper said, you know, they went into weather, you know, thing, and then the next hospital went in. The hospital behind us went. We were the only hospital who did not go into code gray. and we survived. Uh, so, but in general, it worked. It worked out. Of course, I was working at a hospital in Lee Summit. That was one of our hospitals that I was working there, and like at midnight or whatever, and I was checking it was raining. I was checking the weather and patrolling the hospital and whatever, and then the rain was coming down. I had never seen the rain come down, like that. It was coming down. So I went over and checked it several times, looked out. I had my radio on, and I had my ham radio on, so I could listen. I was listening to the main hospital that we were on the radio channel with, although we would have had, I'd have had difficulty. I had to be in a certain spot in order to hit the main hospital, but I could call the main hospital, on the telephone or something. But a guy came in. Him and his wife was a switchboard operator, and he came to pick her up. And they had a little girl, real cute. I forget what she had. She had crutches. What do you call it? Oh man, terrible to get old. Anyway, and he came in and he said, "Have you seen the weather?" I said, "Yeah, I just checked it." He said, "The rain's going sideways." I said, "What?" And so I walked over with him, and the rain was going like this. I said, "I've never seen that before." And so I started walking back. He was with me, walking back to the switchboard operator, and then I heard on the radio, because I had the local police and fire on my ham radio frequency, and I didn't hear any alerts going out or anything, but I did hear on the radio Lee Summit saying there's debris in the roadways, and then they came and said, I forget what it was, a tornado warning for eastern Lee Summit or something like that. And I told the operator, I said, "You need to call the house supervisor and tell her we need to go into code gray." So I was standing there, so she calls the house supervisor, and the supervisor, I'm standing right there, supervisor tells the operator, "Tell Jim to call the Lee Summit police department and ask what we should do." And I said, "No, of course she could hear me, I said, "Tell the house supervisor, no, we need to go into code gray immediately." And then the house supervisor said, "Okay." So then we went into code gray. It turned out it was a microburst, and I don't think I'd actually heard of microbursts before. I know people that are flying. I'm not sure when this, discovery and everything came in, but it was a microburst. Now, people's home, in fact, people's homes that got hit with this, they had major problems because the rain was coming in underneath the roof, the eaves of the roof, and you have these, or probably not all countries build the houses the same way and everything, but you have this vent up there so that hot air can go out. But you have, like the roof comes down, and you don't get rain in there usually, but it was like flooding. It was like somebody had turned a fire hose on. It was just shooting water into people's homes. Anyway, how did I get on that subject? Because I was talking about... Anyway, I was talking about something different. Oh, anyway, Facebook and so at this hospital that I worked at for 9 years out in the community where I lived, we were like a family. Everybody knew everybody, and when a nurse there, an elderly, the nurse that was kind of didn't like police or whatever, Virginia, and but she pretty quick she saw that I was okay, but the police didn't like her because you know, especially I meant what I told you, she would raise I think maybe it was 5 boys. Anyway, police officers would bring some young person in with handcuffs on them, or whatever, and she'd go over and say, "Honey, did the police hurt you? Have they treated you okay?" And man, the police didn't like her. Um, and two, she anyway, it got where we were friends. She she made I could actually show it to you. I still have it after all these years. I've been having worked security for 20 years. I've only worn the shirt the few times. Yet I actually need to get it someplace and have because the things are sewed on, little patches or whatever. They could use some stitching to make it, but I've only worn it a few times. Anyway, she made me a shirt for Christmas or something, gave it to me. And right after that, my mother passed away. And so anyway, Virginia worked, and then there was often a young nurse that worked with her. And the young nurse that worked with her would work, I think, 2 days because she had like 7 kids. She was, born again Christian, objected to Halloween, But, I mean, her and her husband were wonderful people. They didn't have a television set. They, anyway. But, anyway, Penny was a really nice person. And they worked together. Anyway, my mother passed away, so you were allowed 2 days off. So I took 2 days off. Anyway, at the funeral for my mother, Penny showed up. And Penny was, born again Christian, did not like Catholics. And, but she came to the, Catholic funeral. For my mother. So anyway, I thanked her for showing up and everything. And now Virginia didn't show up, and of course those nurses worked 12-hour shifts, and Virginia worked full time. And the way the schedule was set up for them is they worked, and nurses, especially emergency room nurses, but all nurses, they work their asses off, and emergency room nurses work, especially hard and stressful and everything else. So I didn't expect anybody. I didn't expect anybody to show up from the hospital or anything. I sure didn't expect Virginia to show up or anything. An elderly nurse, working a 12-hour shift, I could hardly work, and I wasn't. I was doing security work, and I wasn't doing the stuff they were doing. So anyway, when I came back to work, then, Penny wasn't working that day, because she worked, I think, like 2 days a week. And anyway, Virginia said, "Oh, Jim, I'm, sorry to hear," the elderly nurse, "sorry to hear about your mother." And I said, she said, I couldn't go because, and I said, "Oh, I understand you're working a 12-hour shift. I don't see how you do it." I said, I didn't expect you to show up or anything." And she said, Penny told me that she went, and Virginia said, "I asked Penny how's Jim doing," and Penny said, "Well, he seemed to be doing okay." And then Virginia, who made the shirt for me, said, "What was he wearing?" And then Penny, and I forget how Penny put it, Penny said, "Oh, he had on this really," I should get that shirt for you. Hang on here a second. Let's see. Let me shut this down because I'm going to get up here and no pants. I don't have any pants on. Why don't I have pants on? Because I go to the bathroom so much. Hang on. Okay, back. Okay, here's that shirt that Virginia made for me. Like I said, I only wore it a few times. Anyway, Virginia asked, Penny, what was he wearing? And then Penny described this. And I'm sure that made Virginia happy that I wore it, I still have it. Anyway, I don't think I mentioned Chris, no. Also working at that hospital was a young nurse who, Chris, everybody, just young, and everybody really, Virginia, was protective of Chris, things like that. Chris had a rare form of cancer, and she had surgery for it. I mean, it was a very rare form of cancer, and a bad one. And she had surgery, and it worked. They got it all. But the surgery was invasive and what have you, and because of that surgery, Chris ended up with diabetes, type 1 diabetes, and really bad. And some of you that are into medicine or whatever may say, no, it's not possible. Her blood sugar would go to zero. You're not supposed to be able to, it would go to zero. I mean, it didn't go to zero, I guess, every time, but it went a bunch of times. The way I found out about it, I was working, like I said, at that hospital. And the nurse said, Jim, call Chris and see why she's not here. And I said, Diane, she's only 15 minutes late. Of course, it was unusual for a nurse to be late, especially for the emergency room or whatever. But she said, no, call. She has diabetes. And I said, okay. And I called, to check on her. And I think the paramedics had to go. And the paramedics, Lee Summit, they had to smash her door down several times, and finally she gave them a key to her apartment. She had a son about the time that happened, I think maybe 9 or something like that. He pried her mouth open, with I think a spoon, and chipped her tooth or whatever to get orange juice or something into her. But anyway, she was working at the hospital, and now I didn't notice this, but then once I was told, she would be, sort of the pattern was she'd be standing next to the patient's cart, the patient be on the cart, and she maybe she was supposed to do something. Maybe she was supposed to get a tetanus shot for him or something, and she'd just be standing there, and I think the patient would be like, you know, why is she looking at me or something? But the nurses would pick up on it. So then finally, then I was able to pick up on that. And so then I would take her in the break room and get her an orange juice or something like that. And then it became also where then I had to keep her from going to the bathroom because she didn't know when this was coming on. I mean, but she knew because she'd had a thing where she, wet her pants when the thing came on. So in her brain or whatever, when this feelings or whatever came on, instead of thinking, I got to get an orange juice, or something, she was thinking, I got to get into the bathroom, Didn't want to wet her pants in front of somebody, so I had to make sure she didn't get in the bathroom and that I got her, an orange juice or something. So as time went by, and we'd be, everybody, we were all friends there. And finally at some point I'd ask her, I'd be sitting there to make sure she was okay. And then I asked her, Chris, when I give you the orange juice or whatever, you seem like bang, I said, how, I forget how I put it, how alert are you? And she says, it takes a while. It takes a while before I'm, 100%. One day there was this real nice young ER clerk, and her newly married. Her husband was a firefighter. In fact, he was he was young. It was a volunteer fire department. Well, at that point, I think it had progressed to. That's when it was volunteer fire department, and I went through. I mentioned that. I won't go through that. Went through their. I went through their training, and then I found. And then I found out there was the police department there. Had a reserve police department, so I signed up for that. So after the fire department training, the guys, we were all wondering, we finished our training, why haven't we got the permit so we can use our blue lights and our sirens, and everything. And I had a feeling what it was, because it was okay when Roots was playing, when Roots was out on television the first time, and I believe it was a 4-day, and so I'm thinking it was like Thursday or something. And the last day, I'm at home, and then tone goes off. I wasn't allowed to use my siren or red lights, or, well, I had a red light, but it was covered up with a sock. Because as a police officer, I could, as a reserve police officer, anyway. But the tone went off, and usually I had trouble making it to the fire station in time. It was very close, but I had trouble because there was people that lived right next door to the fire station. They were volunteers or whatever. By the time I got there, they had the truck loaded, and I'd be pulling in and they'd be pulling out. And, but anyway, I got there and it was just the fire chief and myself, and we went out. Because I think everybody was staying at home because of Roots. And the last day of Roots. And so we come back to the station, and the dispatcher who dispatched for the police department and the fire department at that time, eventually they had their own, but the chief of police, or the fire chief there, I was there with him, and the police officer was on duty. He called, dispatch, how many firefighters responded on that fire? And the dispatcher said, I don't know. And then the fire chief said, "God damn son of a bitch, Raymore police officer, none of his goddamn fucking business how many, or, whatever." And I thought, oh shit. you know, and then I was thinking, I mean, I didn't care. I mean, what the hell? Why would I care about, if he wants to, have that attitude or whatever? I didn't care. But I thought, this is going to be a problem. And I thought, if I say something to him now, he's going to think that he's going to be embarrassed. He's going to think that, I'm just not going to say anything. But anyway, then we're waiting. The firefighters are these, like 6 of us or 7 of us waiting for, why aren't we getting our permit? And they're saying, why aren't we getting our permits, And I was standing there thinking, I got an idea. So then they had a fire department meeting, all the firemen had to come in because it was, what was it? Some event in Raymore. Can't remember what the day was or something. And police department had decided, what each of our assignments were going to be, and mine was going to be in the crowd, in civilian clothes. And then we had other, things going on. And then, of course, we had the fire department has their meeting. I think it was a regular meeting, or I don't think it was special before this event. But anyway, the fire chief says, "Okay, now all of you, I've made up an assignment here for you. I don't want to hear any excuses. This is what your assignment's going to be, and you are going to be there." Now, of course, these were all volunteer firefighters, by the way. And so he goes through the list, and then he comes to me, and he says, I forget, first aid station or something. I forget what it was. And I said, "Chief, sorry, got a problem. I can't be there." And he says, "Why can't you be there?" And I said, "I'm working for the police department that night." And his face got red. Then he goes over to the dispatcher, who dispatched for both the fire and the police department, and they're looking at me and whatever. And so that's how then I got, not with the chief. Anyway, I got a notice pretty quickly, that I come into the fire station and talk to the assistant chief. And so I went in, and the assistant chief said, "Jim, we found out that you are a reserve officer with the," I don't think he said reserve officer, that you're an officer with, Raymore PD. You can't be a police officer and a firefighter at the same time. And by that time, I'd figured out, no, I didn't want to be a firefighter. Too much work. I mean, I just preferred in a patrol car by myself. I didn't want to do that other stuff, But anyway, you know me. I said, "Now, why would that be? Why can't you be both?" "Well, if you showed up at the fire, we wouldn't know if you were showing up as a policeman or a fireman." And I said, "Well, if I came with an axe, I'd be a fireman. If I came with a gun, I'd be a police officer." And I didn't laugh or anything, And he said, "No." I said, "Okay." So, anyway, back to the hospital. Anyway, I mentioned that I was like on Facebook, I believe, but I don't. I have a couple of family members are on there too, and that's the only reason I use Facebook. I don't like Facebook. I never liked Facebook. But there's a person on there that I worked with at the hospital also. And anyway, the elderly nurse, Virginia, who I turned out to be really good friends with, but I was kind of, I wondered in the beginning, she was, one time a patient came in and, well, not more than one time, patients would come in, men would come in and they'd have an earring in her, and she would go over, Virginia would go over and say, I never can remember, okay, does it being in this ear, does that mean you're gay? Or when I was like, oh my God, And she would do that regularly. And then also, when they would call the helicopter crew, of course, needs to, they need to know how much the patient weighs, because a helicopter is limited by, they have equipment in there and everything else, and they need to know. They need to know the IVs. Hey, how many do you have in which arms? Uh, what gauge are they? And there's stuff they do need to know. But Virginia was an old timey nurse, and I heard her several times. Um, she would just tell them, just get on out here, whatever. And I thought, oh, Virginia, please, oh my God. I happened to, anyway, it usually, an awful lot of the time, if the ER was busy, and if the ER wasn't busy, but they did have a patient to go out, and it would be Virginia, well, then she'd go over and she would, she'd call the helicopter, and then she probably would say what the answer to their questions. But if they were busy, with that patient, maybe coding or something or other, or if there were other patients, and there was only 2 ER nurses, and I helped out a lot, especially since I was an EMT. I helped out, a lot in the doing little things, you know, uh, to help them out. But anyway, it got where quite often I'd be answering the telephone. Uh, I'd be calling the helicopter, and when they and I, Um, but anyway, I was off for a day. I forget, it was some kind of a, I mean, I didn't miss work ever. Even when I was sick, I didn't miss work. Um, but I was off for some reason, holiday or something, and I would always, I worked at the small hospital for 9 years, so until the main hospital. I want to take some vacation days. You tell me what days, you can get somebody out here. I'm taking off for the holiday or whatever, you know, schedule somebody to come out, and you tell me. I mean, I was just easy to get along with, although uh, I had some problems with the main hospital and with the people there. But anyway, I wasn't there this one night, and when I came into work the next day or whatever, Virginia said, "Well, Jim, I'm in trouble." And I said, "Virginia, what did you do this time?" She said, I forget if it was Life Flight or the Eagle. She says, I think it was the Eagle, which is the helicopter for our hospital, not for the little tiny, but for the whole. And she said, they were asking me, such and such and such, and, I told them, just get your asses on out here. And then she said to me, she says, did you know that they record the calls that go in? I said, oh yes, Virginia. It's like 911 except for helicopters. Yeah, and she said, okay, well they wrote me up. So anyway, this nurse that still works at Research Belton Hospital. On Facebook, I left a thing. I said, I think I know the answer, but how's Chris, how's Chris doing? Of course, I had to use the last name, how's Chris doing? And then I said, and also, how's, Virginia doing? I said, I've gone to the obituaries, online and checked over the years because, of course, Virginia was, old. And, of course, I thought that, I'm sure that, anyway, I asked. And anyway, the nurse answered back and said, Chris passed away young. She had a lot of medical problems, and she passed away young. And of course, I knew that. I just knew that was going to happen. And then she said, Virginia's, passed away. Now, Virginia was up there in years, and she passed away. And then she mentioned another nurse that worked in the emergency room that, that she had passed away. And I mean, she was, I think, old enough that not that, I was surprised that she had passed away. And I asked if, I actually said, she didn't take her own life, did she? So I haven't heard back, Anyway, that's the story. Like I said, I'm using Manicam. And Alex Jones, wow, he just, if you're in another country, Alex Jones is, if there's a worse person that whatever country you're in or whatever, if there's just somebody that you go, oh my God, Alex Jones for us is that person, a right winger. Anyway, well, to give you an example of right now what this is all about is, every time there was a school shooting or anytime there was anything at all, Alex Jones would say, no, it didn't happen. It's fake. They use actors. It's just so anyway, there was a school shooting and a guy went in, with an assault rifle. And, he shot up, I think, a first grade and kindergartners, maybe it was first grade and second grade or something, at Sandy Hook. He went in and shot all the kids in these the two rooms, and, assault rifle, of course. And anyway, Alex Jones on his thing said, there wasn't any school shooting, and he would pull up, here's a picture of the school, and he'd say, look here, and then he'd pull up another picture, the school, and he'd say, well, and he said, no, and then he went on and on for this, the parents are actors, the children were actors. He pulled up a picture of, and not just once, for years. He pulled up a picture of a little girl, in a nice dress or something. And he said, look, this, here's the picture of the girl who was, supposedly killed. She was, and now, but here she is later on. Say she's got the same dress on, or whatever. And if I remember correctly, I think it might have been, I forget what the deal was, but I mean, this guy. Oh no. Anyway, he told these stories about that it was a fake shooting. These are actors. And then, of course, these right-wing people, these parents lost, children that were 5 or 6 years old. And these people would, call up, or they would threaten the parents, say that, it's just all fake, threaten the parents. These first two people that have now sued and won, they had to move 6, 7, or 8, or 9 times, because they would move someplace and people would get, you know, how the internet is, people would get the new address, they would threaten to kill them, they would do all kinds of stuff. Okay, they won, I think it was $2.5 million a day or two ago. And then for punitive damages, today, they were awarded $45.2 million. Now there'll be some more lawsuits coming. And of course, he claims that he sells Alex Jones. Well, you just wouldn't believe what a horrible person he is. And he sells, what do you think he sells, He sells pills. He claims that there are, I forget what that we've all been indoctrinated by the, communist whatever, and we have something in us that the communists or the Democrats, are going to be able to turn us off and we'll drop over dead. Or, he's got all these crazy things that he does, and, he sells pills that will correct, it just, all this kind of, and he's bringing in money, and then plus two, he's, by the stuff that he's been doing, the right-wing extremist stuff or whatever, people have been sending him tons of money. But he claims, he's claiming bankruptcy for all of his enterprises. But he's raked in, and the right-wing people will, they'll send him money to, pay for these damages and things. They'll try to come up with money to pay, But I just hope that all of these cases, I just hope that they just come down, It's amazing. It's almost, the thing yesterday, I think it was, Alex Jones was on the stand yesterday it was about damages, and he had been asked repeatedly under oath if he had discussed the school, the school shooting, Sandy Hook, and that kind of stuff. If he had ever discussed it, on sending text messages or anything on his phone, he said no, never, 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 never. And of course, they don't just ask it once. They ask it several times. They ask it different ways. No, no, no. Maybe there is a God. Because Alex Jones' lawyers sent a few weeks back or whatever, the lawyers for the family or whatever had requested information. And so Alex Jones' lawyers sent over data from the cell phone of Alex Jones, and it's unbelievable. They sent over this phone, or the transcript from it or whatever. It had 2 years of all of Alex Jones's communications, 2 years of text messages. And in those text messages, he repeatedly had talked about the Sandy Hook thing and that whole thing. Perjury. So I just hope that, I hope these people collect every penny that he has. And then I hope they also, hope the, Justice Department and whatever, I hope they go after him for perjury. They can't do enough to this guy, as far as I'm concerned. The things that he did, the pain and suffering that he put these families through. They didn't need that kind of, to lose a child, you know. You know, my ex-wife and I, you know, ours are grown, you know. But even grown, I mean, but just think to lose a 6-year-old child, and for the 6-year-old child to be shot to pieces by somebody with an assault rifle, and then to have somebody saying, no, your child didn't die, it's all fake. Yeah, I just hope they come down. It looks like they are, finally. But no matter what the punitive damages are, you can't undo the damage, the trauma to these people. Anyway, I guess that's it. It's about 8:21 p.m. here. How long have we been recording? 50 minutes. So, anyways, sorry to hear about these nurses that I worked with. I knew the one nurse. She had diabetes. Chris had diabetes so bad. One time, one of our nurses was driving. That nurse had worked at our hospital, but she was working at the main hospital, and she was driving to work. And she saw the paramedics on an ambulance, you know, stopped, you know, someplace, and they were wrestling with some person in the ambulance, trying to control this person. And it was Chris, this nurse with, you know, and you know, this nurse stopped to, she didn't know it was, at that time she didn't know who it was, you know, she just stopped to help the paramedics, you know, and she got into the ambulance or whatever, and of course she was in uniform and everything, and they said, oh, we got a drunk lady, you know, or whatever, and the nurse said, I know her, you know, she's one of our nurses, and she has diabetes really bad, so it's diabetic, or whatever, and you know, things like that. I told you that Virginia, the older nurse, you know, it turned out that, you know, she liked me. I mean, she got where we were friends. And one time Chris wasn't working, and she was out late with some people and drinking a little bit. And I guess her blood sugar must have, well, it did. It went down on her. And she jumped from second floor patio or something to the, you know, to the ground. Did something to her foot or whatever. So they were bringing her in by ambulance, you know. And, you know, Virginia knew that I liked Chris. And everybody liked Chris. And when they were bringing Chris in and everything, I was telling Virginia, I said, you know, we all like working with Chris and everything, but I said Chris needs to, she doesn't need to be working the night shift, midnight shift. She needs to be working at a doctor's office, you know, a regular schedule where they could go to lunch at noon or something every day or whatever, so she'd be taking her medicine. And Virginia liked me, but Virginia, you know, didn't like that, so didn't like what I said, you know. So anyway, thank you very much for watching.